Hi, this is material for Chapter 10 on personality. So for personality, we've got our student learning objectives here and a definition, of course, to start us off. So the personality, what we're going to be talking about are kind of these unique, consistent patterns of thinking, feeling, and behaving. We're going to go through several perspectives on personality. The first one, what we're going to spend quite a while with, is the psychoanalytic perspective. So you probably heard of Sigmund Freud. He's the founder of our psychoanalytic perspective. We don't call Freud our founder of psychology, but he is still a very important person in psych. He studied medicine, did research on cocaine, and he really lived a difficult life. He had mouth cancer, many surgeries, lots of pain for mouth cancer. He faced a lot of issues with Nazi persecution, lost several family members to internment camps. He was had a very difficult life, which kind of helps to explain a little bit of his theory. So Freud developed this technique of free association. And so this is what you might think of when you think of counseling. So this would be laying back on a couch and just kind of looking up and saying everything that comes to your mind. So you might start with the sun, and then move into rainbow, a teacup, grass, a little bird, giant teeth, and you just kind of talk and talk and talk until you get to the end of your statement. So you just be free associating. He thought that we had several layers to our personality, our dynamic theory, or his dynamic theory of personality. So he has several layers. So the biggest layer is the unconscious. And we can use the iceberg as kind of a metaphor for this. So if you see the iceberg, a lot of that under the surface is the unconscious. So it's things that we're not really aware of, but they drive our behavior. The preconscious is this level that's right above the unconscious. We're not thinking of that stuff, but you can easily pull it into memory. So if I ask you what the name of your first dog was, or who's the first president of the United States, that information, you weren't currently thinking about it, but you can easily pull it right back up and into your conscious awareness. Our conscious awareness is what we're immediately aware of. And again, this is a theory that Freud put forth, so this isn't something I can point to and say, here's your unconscious, here's your subconscious, or your preconscious. Can't do that, but it's Freud's theory of how our personality works. He thought the unconscious was extremely important. So the unconscious, this content, we're not really aware of it, but it comes through. So it comes through in forms that are distorted, disguised. So things like free association, as you just talk and talk and talk, some of that unconscious material come out. He thought you could review dreams and find that unconscious material. And then when you have a slip of the tongue, this was your unconscious trying to get out. He was really big into dream analysis. So he would look at the manifest content, which is on the surface. So this little graphic down here shows you might have dreams about carrots, and lots of carrots, and they're coming into the ground, pointing down, they're huge carrots. And he would say this has a meaning underneath the surface of carrot. And that meaning would be latent content. So that's the true meaning, and it's unconscious. So for that, you might say that you're afraid of the penis. A lot of things with Freud go back to sex and aggression. So that's why the topic kind of has a lot of sex and aggression in it. But he might say that that was the latent content then, was the penis. The personality structures are things that are really important for Freud. So I have this part highlighted here. He thought the id was in this unconscious level, and the id is kind of this impulsive drive. The superego is right in the middle, in the preconscious level, and this is our moralistic drives. And then the ego is conscious, and this is how we present ourselves to the world. It's our rational reality type of principle, is our ego. So this will go through the id, so this is the pleasure principle. It's ruled by those sexual and aggressive drives. And he thought the energy came from several domains. So it comes from the eros, which is the desire to enhance our survival or stay alive. The thanatos, which I can never pronounce correctly, but it's our death instinct, so our desire to do things that are life-threatening, and then our libido is our sex drive. The superego, as I said, is kind of this moralistic thing. It's our internal parental voice, and it provides us with these feelings of guilt and shame. And the ego is that reality principle, so this helps us to meet the demands of the outside world, helps repress things that are not acceptable. So you can kind of picture this as this graphic here with the little angel and the devil on the shoulders. So the id would be the devil, the superego would be the angel, and then the person is the ego, the reality part. Freud thought that we had defense mechanisms that we use when our ego becomes overwhelmed. And these defense mechanisms help us to distort our thoughts to cope with this feeling of overwhelm or anxiety. I've got a list of all these defense mechanisms here, and I've also attached in a quiz there, a little fun trivia quiz that you can play to kind of make sure you understand each of these defense mechanisms. Freud's psychosexual stages, he thought that we move through our stages in our development, and we go through these stages, and there's a conflict that we have to face at each stage. And if you become overindulged in a stage, so you get too much input, or frustrated, you don't receive enough input, Freud thought you could develop a fixation within that stage. This is a graphic showing his stages, so you can see kind of going with the ages, starting with the oral and ending with the genital stages. So this will tell us also the description. So really what this is the focus on is how does the person receive pleasure. So he's not saying that an infant from birth age 1 or from 1 to 3, that these are true sexual beings. He's not saying that. He's just saying where do we derive our pleasure from at that age. The Oedipus complex is a really interesting kind of idea from Freud. It's something that's very controversial, and one of the things that many people dislike the most about Freud is his ideas of the Oedipus complex. He thought that kids have an unconscious sexual desire for their opposite sex parent. So if you're a girl, it would be for your father. If you're a boy, it would be for your mother. And then because this person was your rival, you would show hostility towards that same sex parent. He thought this manifested for boys in castration anxiety, where they were afraid that their father was going to castrate them. And they would resolve this by identifying with the father, by hanging out with him, trying to learn his ways and really kind of get in there so the dad would maybe kind of take pity on him and not castrate him, or would like him and not castrate him. For girls, this would manifest in penis envy. So girls would wish that they had a penis, that they would experience this envy of the penis. Some of these stages we see with the latency stage, the sexual urges are repressed in this stage. So most of the time it's kind of a period of relative calm, focus on same-sex peers. During the genital stage, however, those incestual urges from the Oedipus complex would resurface. But instead of being attracted to your opposite sex parent, the superego would direct those urges towards an acceptable substitute. So somebody who's like your dad but is not your dad, or like your mom but is not your mom. That's what Freud thought would happen, that we'd seek out partners that were similar to our parents. These next theorists, we call them Neo-Freudians because they built on Freud's work. The first one is Carl Jung. Carl Jung was a very important guy, but what he really did for us was forward several ideas. So the collective unconscious is one of his most popular ideas. And this is the idea that humans are born with this intimate knowledge of our evolutionary history. And so they kind of have this broad-reaching knowledge of who we are as people. And this would be something they're born with, and it's common to all. And he said that the evidence for this is that we have archetypes, so we have these universal mythic characters, such as the witch, or the virtuous woman, or the cowardly person, or I'm trying to think of some of his other archetypes. But he said that we would have these archetypes, these mythical characters, and you'd see them throughout different cultures. And this was evidence for the idea that we have a collective unconscious. Horney came along and said that women do not have penis envy. What they envy is men's social power. So she kind of was in reaction to Freud and said, hey, we don't have penis envy. We want to have your place in society. And she said that men suffer from womb envy. So they're envious that they can't bring forth life into the world. So that's what they suffer from, is womb envy. Adler built on Freud's work and thought that the motive for underlying all of our behavior was this striving to be superior. So he thought some people would exaggerate their importance, so they developed this superiority complex. Even though they weren't great at some tasks, they would just really exaggerate their ability. Others might develop an inferiority complex, so they feel like they're inadequate or weak or helpless. They need somebody else to do for them. So this is some ways that the striving for superiority could go wrong, according to Adler. The next perspective, so moving out of psychoanalytic and getting into humanistic, the humanist perspective on personality is this idea of a third force, so kind of being in contrast to behaviorism or psychoanalysis. And really they focused on free will, self-awareness, on people's goodness, their inherent goodness. Rogers is an important theorist in the humanist perspective. He thought that the motive for behavior was an actualizing tendency. So we want to get self-actualized. We want to know about ourselves. Our self-concept's really important in this. and also the idea of positive regard. So Rogers thought that most of the time people received conditional positive regard. So people only like them or only show approval when the person is good or when they do things that others want them to do. But he said we really need unconditional positive regard in order to develop ourselves fully. The social cognitive perspective on personality, this is the idea that personality is derived from learning, from conscious cognitive processes. So it's that social learning from situational influences, or that they're important. So if you look at someone's personality in a class like maybe history, they're excited, they're engaged, so that's an important situational influence, but then you find them in physics, they're bored and withdrawn in that situation. So they would say it's important to understand people across multiple situations, that the situation has an important influence on personality and behavior. Bandura was an important person coming from this social cognitive perspective. He thought that with personality we have this reciprocal determinism, where all of these factors, our cognition, our behavior, and the situational influences all influence each other. He also thought that something that was really important for our personality development was self-efficacy. So your beliefs about your own ability. Do you think you can do things? And this actually, do I believe I can speak a sentence? Do I believe I can run a marathon? This is something important because if you believe that you can, then you'll try it. And that'll be part of your personality then, someone who can run marathons. If you don't think you can, you'll never try. So it's an important component is this self-efficacy. And the final perspective is the trait perspective, and this is the idea that you can measure individual differences in people. And this is a really important perspective. Many people come from this nowadays, and if I ask you to describe a friend, you're probably going to give me their traits, a list of their traits. The traits you would probably list are on the surface, so these are inferred traits from observable behavior. So if you observe someone, you might say they're happy, they're grumpy, they're friendly. But what psychologists are interested in are the source traits. So where do all these traits kind of originate? What are a few broad, basic traits that we can identify? People have looked at this, different theorists. So Cattell thought we might have 16 of these broad, basic source traits, but we found that's too many. Eisning thought we might have 3, but we found that's too few. So it's kind of been a Goldilocks approach. What we did end up finding is that about 5 traits, the 5-factor model we call the Big 5, really explains a lot of personality. So these are widely used. I use the oceans to help me remember that. So it's openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. And you can review what these look like here in the graphic. We have a lot of evidence for this aspect of personality through genetics, through neuroscience. So we know that extroversion and neuroticism have a strong genetic link. We can see these differences in neuroscience with brain imaging. So people highly extroverted, their brain lights up to positive images. People highly neurotic, their brain lights up to negative images. So we kind of get a lot from that. This chart will go through the major personality perspectives, so you can review that. And the final topic is how we assess personality. So some of our tests are projective, and this is things like the Rorschach, where you see ink blots, or the thematic apperception test, where you tell stories about these ambiguous scenes. So this is just some examples of the Rorschach, and we would just ask people, what do you see in these graphics? These are some examples of the thematic apperception test. So you might say, what's happening here? What's happening in this picture? And what's happening here? Critique of these projective tests is that it is hard to score them, so the scoring can be inconsistent. So then we move into some self-report inventories. These are great. The Minnesota, it's a new state, Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory, the MMPI. This is a really, really intense questionnaire. It has more than 500 questions, but it really helps us to kind of get at people's personality. It has some lying scales. The MBTI you might have taken, so this will give some typologies that you might fit into, extroverted, sensing, things like that. This is really interesting. A lot of people do it, but it does have some reliability and validity issues. So some critiques for these self-report type measures. The good things are they're standardized, but the limitations are that they can be difficult. If you imagine filling out 500 answer bubbles, it's a lot, and people might not judge their own behavior well. So that's it for personality. Let me know if you have any questions.